The stock is expected to pay a $2 dividend in 1 year. The dividend 2 years from now is expected to be 20% higher. The stock is expected to sell at 18.25 years from now. 18.25 2 years from now. And the required return is 20%, so this will be our discount rate. The stock's estimated value, assuming a 2-year investment horizon, is equal to. So the best way to solve this problem is using cash flows on your calculator. So we're going to take all these cash flows from the dividend and what we're expecting to sell the stock at, and then we're going to discount them back in this 20% number. So going into your cash flow 0 will be nothing since we're looking at a dividend a year from now. So our first cash flow is going to be that $2 dividend, and we have 1 for frequency. And then our second cash flow is going to be this 18.25, and then the $2 dividend, which is going to be 20% higher. So our dividend is going to be $2.40, and then our stock is expected to sell at 18.25. So we add those two together to get an inflow of 20.65, and that's a frequency of 1. Go a little further just to make sure you have no more cash flows in your calculator. And then we'll go to NPV, put 20 in as that discount rate, and then we'll scroll down and compute, and we get 16.0069, which is going to be closest to answer C for us. While trying to develop a competitive strategy, a company opts for the leadership cost strategy. So leadership cost strategy means they are going to be leaders in having the lowest cost to produce. Which of the following is most likely one of the features of this company? A, the company has less proportion of market share. That's probably going to be incorrect. If they have the lowest cost, they're probably also going to have the lowest or one of the lowest prices. And so if they have a lower price, they're probably going to have a higher proportion of the market share, not lower. B, the company has low cost of capital. That could certainly be our answer. In order to have the lowest cost, one of the main inputs there is your cost of capital. So if you can drive down that cost, then you should have a better chance at having a lower cost of production in general. And then C, the company has the power to set higher commodity prices than its competitors. This is going to be incorrect since this is more focused on what we're selling, whereas the leadership cost strategy is more focused on the inputs and the cost to our business. Answer B, Carton Company expects to produce 50,000 units of watches for the following year. The selling price per watch is $200. The variable cost per watch is $100. Fixed costs are $3.5 million, and interest costs are $750,000. The degree of operating leverage and the degree of total leverage for Carton Company is closest to. We've got numbers here, so we're going to be calculating. Let's pull in our formulas here that we'll be using for total leverage and operating leverage. The main difference between the two is going to be that interest cost being included. So degree of total leverage is going to be quantity sold multiplied by our price minus our variable cost. So we're doing 50,000 units, selling at 200, and our variable cost is 100. So we're going to do 50,000 times 200 minus 100. That'll be in our denominator. And notice that's going to be the denominator for our degree of operating leverage as well. And then the next variable in our denominator, sorry, I might have said that was denominator. This is our numerator. Our denominator here is going to be that same value. So the gross profit is what this is. Units times variable price minus variable cost, which is also going to be in our degree of operating leverage right here. And then the main difference here comes in, we have for total leverage, we're looking at operating leverage and financial leverage. So we take into account fixed costs and interest costs, whereas under operating leverage, we're only going to look at those fixed costs. So we plug all those numbers in, and really the only difference is this last value. So we have 750 in interest costs here, but that's not included in operating leverage. So we get total leverage of 6.67 and operating leverage of 3.33. So operating leverage here, we'll rule that out, and then total leverage, we can rule that one out and go with the answer B. Raman Enterprises and Madan Enterprises are operating in the same industry segment of locks manufacturing. There's an expectation of improvement in the market environment and a 20% increase in sales for all the industry players going forward. Both companies have an identical scale of operations with total assets deployed of 400,000 and unit sales of 100,000. They sell their products at $4 per unit, incurring a variable cost of $2 per unit and fixed costs of 50,000. Raman Enterprises finances 40% of its assets from equity and 60% from debt. Madan Enterprises finances its operations 100% from equity. The interest rate on debt for both companies is 8%. The degree of total leverage for the two companies is closest to. So we've got different values here for Raman and Madan. So we need to calculate total degree of leverage for both of these. So let's pull in that formula and work through this. So our formula, it's going to be a lot of variables here, but essentially this ends up being our gross profit here. So we're going to take quantity that we sold, and then we're multiplying by our sales amount per unit and then taking out the variable cost. So under both scenarios, Madan and Raman are selling the same amount. So we have sales of 100,000, and then their P, which is price, is 4 per unit, and then V, which is variable cost or cost of goods sold, is $2 per unit. So they both end up with the same gross margin there. And then we're dividing by, so in the denominator here, we're going to have that same value, so our gross profit. And then we're going to subtract out fixed costs, and then we're going to subtract out interest cost. So for fixed costs, we are given that at 50,000 as well. So really the only difference between the two of these is going to be our interest cost. And that is because Raman finances 60% from debt and Madan finances 100% from equity, so they'll have no debt. So Madan is going to be more straightforward in that they won't have interest cost. So we'll calculate that first. So in our numerator, we have 100,000 times 4 minus 2. And then we're going to divide that by 100,000 times 4 minus 2 and then minus 50,000. So we get 1.3333 as their operating or total leverage. So we have that answer here and here. So we can rule out B. And then for Raman, we need to now calculate by also including that interest cost. So Raman's interest cost, we have 400,000 in assets deployed, and they have 60% of that in debt. So we're gonna do 400,000 times 60%, and then we're gonna multiply by the interest cost of 8% to get our interest cost, multiply by the interest rate to get our interest cost. So that ends up being at 19,200. So most of this formula, it ends up being exactly the same, and then we add in that minus 19,200 at the end. And so that's decreasing our denominator, which is going to make our total leverage go up. And so under this scenario, Raman has higher leverage at 1.53, which is going to lead us to answer C. For a 10-year 5% annual pay bond with a face value of $1,000, currently trading at par, the approximate modified duration based on a change in yield of 25 basis points is closest to. So what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be using this approximate modified duration formula. And we are given a few of these values off the bat, but then we are going to need to calculate. So off the bat, we're given that's just given in the formula. And we're given change in yield, and the current present value. So we're currently trading at par. So this value would be 1,000, and our change in yield is going to be this 25 basis points. So the two unknowables here are PV minus and PV plus. So PV minus is the price of this bond if we hit under a subtraction of 25 basis points from the yield. And then PV plus is the price if we increase the yield by 25 basis points. So what we're going to do here is we're going to pull up our calculator, and we're going to plug in these numbers basically to calculate the price of the bond under these two scenarios, and then we'll plug those numbers in to do so. So our N is going to be 10 for the 10-year bond. Our present value is what we're going to be solving for. Our yield is going to be our since we're trading at par, that implies that our yield right now is also 5%. So we're going to do 5.25% under the increase scenario. And then payment will be 5% times 1,000, which is 50. And then future value will be 1,000. So we have those all plugged in, and then we will compute present value. So we get about 981. So write that number down, keep some decimals in there, and then we're going to use that to solve. So that's going to be our PV plus value. So then for PV minus, the only thing we need to change is our interest rate. So we're going to do 4.75 instead of 5.25, and then we'll compute present value, and we get 1,019.5409. So then from here, we're going to take those two numbers and we're going to plug those into our formula. We rounded a significant amount here. You probably wouldn't normally round this much on the test, but that's what we did for this problem. And when we plug in those two price values, we get 7.8 for the modified duration, which is going to be equal to answer B. Matrix pricing is most likely used for determining the price of new bonds, actively traded bonds, or 3 inactive bonds. So is this going to be 1 only, 1 and 3 only, or 1, 2, and 3? So we're going to be using matrix pricing when the bond doesn't have any recent market prices or information available. So if the bond is not traded very often. So that's going to rule out 2 right off the bat. Actively traded bonds are not going to need matrix pricing. You can just go look at the recent price that bond traded at to determine the pricing. You don't need to do matrix pricing to see what other bonds of different maturities and credit ratings are trading for. So this is going to be most helpful for new bonds in determining what the pricing of that new bond should be, since there may not, it obviously hasn't traded yet. So you would want to look at other similarly type of credit risk and maturity bonds to determine that pricing. And this would also apply to inactively traded bonds. So we're going to go with answer B here. This will be used for 1 and 3. Bond A's yield and yield spread increased by the same amount. From this, we can conclude that the increase in Bond A's yield was most likely caused by A, microeconomic factors, B, macroeconomic factors, or C, both macro and microeconomic factors. So we've got yield and yield spread increasing by the same amount. So looking at these two things, microeconomic and macroeconomic factors, microeconomic is going to be more granular at the company level. And so the yield spread is going to be a lot more important for microeconomic, because that yield spread going up or down is telling us whether the credit risk of that bond is changing over time. So that's going to be more focused on that specific company. So since this yield spread is increasing by the same amount as the yield, it would tell us that our credit risk increased, and that was the main cause of the yield. So I would lean towards going with answer A here, microeconomic factors. Where this would become macroeconomic factors is if there was some detail on the economic conditions and if the market interest rates overall increased to some extent, then we would have macroeconomic involved. So microeconomic is going to be company focused. Macro is going to be the overall market. So if we saw some bump in overall market yields, then we would start to have both and or answer B. But we're going to have answer A here. A repurchase agreement is most likely similar to A, an auction, B, a barter transaction, or C, a collateralized loan. This one's going to be answer C, collateralized loan. A repurchase agreement is right there in the name. Essentially what you're doing is I'm giving the lender a security. That's the collateral part of this collateralized loan. And then the lender is giving me money. And then I'm essentially agreeing to repurchase that security back, or the collateral, at some higher rate. And so the difference between the money they gave me and the money that I have to buy the collateral back for, is going to be the yield of that loan. And the collateral is in that security that we're giving them. It's not a barter transaction, which would be exchanging one good for another good. That's not the situation in a repo. We're getting cash for a good. And an auction would involve some type of bidding, which is not a part of a repurchase agreement. Answer C. Consider a par bond priced at 1,110 and has a modified duration of 4.562. In response to a 0.5% increase in yield to maturity, the price of the bond should most likely A, fall by approximately this amount, B, fall by approximately this amount, or C, rise by approximately this amount. So we can cross off rise right off the bat, since our yield is increasing, we know that our price of our bond is going to be decreasing, and we're looking for a percentage increase or decrease, or a percentage decrease here. So we're not going to need to involve the par price of the bond. That information isn't needed. So this is our formula we're going to use. Price change is going to be equal to negative modified duration. So we're going to do negative 4.562 and then multiply that by our change in yield, which is positive 0.5%. And so 0.5% is 0.005 in decimal form, which is going to be equal to minus 0.0028. And then we're going to multiply that by 100 to get that in percentage terms. So that's going to be answer B, fall by approximately 2.281%. Which of the following is least likely a primary benefit of securitization? So we've got least likely here. So 2 of these are going to be benefits of securitizing and 1 is not. A, an increase in the liquidity of the underlying financial assets. We can rule this out since this will be a benefit. Think about something like mortgage loans that might be more illiquid. When we take similar type mortgage loans and pool them into a securitized asset, it makes it more liquid because then we're able to trade them kind of as a pool, rather than if we had to trade each of those mortgage loans individually, that would be a lot more tedious and the loans individually would have a lot less liquidity likely. B, an increase in credit rating from banks and other financial institutions. I would lean towards this being our answer. Securitization is not automatically going to increase the credit rating of the underlying assets. It could, depending on the different tranches and whatnot, and securitization does allow for risk transfer, but it's not going to be an automatic increase. So I think we would lean towards this not being a primary benefit. And then C, a reduction in funding costs for firms selling the financial assets to the securitizing entity. This is also going to be a benefit, allows them to kind of recoup some of those costs that came with funding the loans. And so we're going to go with answer B.